What is up, guys? Pie Muffin here, and we are back with another Tales-related video. Today, we're going to be talking about Tales of Rebirth. So, just before we get into, because I'm going to talk about the story, there is going to be spoilers in here, but I'm not going to, like, put blatant spoilers, you know, like, oh, this character dies, or this, and that. But I am going to talk about the general plot of everything. We're going to talk about the plot, we're going to talk about the combat, what I thought of that, and we're just going to talk about the game itself, how I felt about it. So, first I want to give some backstory as to how I played this, because I'm sure a lot of people who haven't played it will be like, wait, isn't that game only in Japanese? And yes, it is. There is no English version, you know, even just Japanese voices with English subtitles, you cannot find that out there. I think there might be some playthroughs on YouTube you could watch, to where you could see that, but there is no, like, actual physical version of the game where you can actually play it. So, what I essentially did is I had the game itself, you know, that I played, and then there is and I'll try to put this, if I remember, I'll put the link to this in the description of the video, where I had a translated story guide. I mean, it was just a translated guide in general, but I mainly just used it for the story. I figured out the gameplay and stuff as I was going along. But yeah, so I had a story guide that essentially, I think it was on GameFAQs, so luckily they have like a bookmark thing. So anytime I would stop playing, I would just hit bookmark, and that would be at whatever skit or whatever next scene I was going to be at, and I literally just followed it with that, which at first was a little irritating because I wasn't used to it, but once I got like more than halfway through the game, I found myself being fine with using the translation guide, because I was just so interested in seeing what was going to happen next. And I am so, I don't want to say mad, but I'm so disappointed that this never came to the West, because this is an amazing game. Like, honestly, it's definitely in my top 5 Tales games, even though I had to use a translation guide for it. So, that's kind of my backstory as to how that worked. I actually started my playthrough probably close to a year ago. It really took me a while to really get in the mood to kind of like be like, okay, let's pull up the translation guide, let's pull up the game. And there were some times where, for whatever, I guess because I wasn't logged into my account on GameFAQs, that it reset my thing, so it didn't have my bookmark, so I would constantly have to scroll down. But once I figured that out and I had to log in, it was fine. But overall, this game was amazing. So let's talk about and I'll put some gameplay and stuff in the background here so you guys can see kind of what it looks like. So we're going to talk about the gameplay first. The gameplay was this was technically my first 2D Tales game, because I started with Symphonia. Symphonia was, I'll probably make another video talking about my history with Tales, but essentially Symphonia on the GameCube was the first Tales game I ever played, which technically was a 2D game in a 3D environment. Like, you still only moved left to right, but you could be knocked by enemies in any which direction, and, you know, that kind of stuff, depending on which enemy you were targeting. So it was a 3D game, but you still move left and right. And currently I'm actually playing through Tales of Legendia, which is my first, like, real 2D game, because with Tales of Rebirth, it's kind of this 3-line system where essentially you walk along a line, but you can go up and you can go down on it. So that way you can easily get around enemies and stuff like that, and enemies can obviously do the same thing to you. So that was a thing there. So I did enjoy this. I was totally, it was just weird at first, because I'm so used to, like, a lot, I wouldn't say newer, because Symphonia is not a newer title, but, like, Symphonia was my first game, and then Vesperia, or no, Dawn of the New World was my second game, and then Vesperia was my third game. And then after that, I played Zestiria and Berseria, and then I went back to play all the others. But essentially, most of the Tales games I played were 3D, so this was definitely a new experience, for sure. I did find myself having a bit of trouble as well, because in this game, there's no, I don't want to say it, there's no, essentially, Annie is really your only healer. She has an art called, or a force, because in this game it's called Force. You know how some, like, in Symphonia it's called Tech, in Legendia it's called Eris, and then in this game it's called Force. So she's the only one with a, as far as I was aware, I didn't look at every art that was specifically in the game, just kind of the ones that I learned. I would look up on the wiki with what each one does. But that was kind of the only heal, and she kind of puts up a little circle that if your character or any of the characters stand inside it, they'll slowly get healed over time. But there wasn't like a traditional like first aid or healing circle or, you know, all that kind of stuff there. So what this game essentially has you do is you have these force cubes, which are basically how you kind of set up what your character does. You know, you put your arts, you got your 4 arts that you put on your character, and then you can move your force cube around so that each one of your arts that you use when you use it does a special different ability. And one of those is that every time you use an art, well, it's not one of those. It'll always do this. It's just dependent on how much it'll do. You heal yourself essentially by using your arts. Like when you have this meter that goes up, and when the meter isn't full, as you use these arts, you essentially gain some health back. So you really need to kind of, one, be careful that you're blocking attacks and dodging when you can, but also using as many arts as you can so you can get your HP back. And obviously you have healing items, all the same sort of stuff there. But I did find myself running into trouble, you know, especially boss battles, where, because mainly I played as Vague, who is the main character of the story, obviously. Anyone who's played the mobile games or seen some extra lore and stuff will know who Vague is. And I assume a lot of people who are subscribed to me know who Vague is because of Tales of the Rays and what have you there. But yeah, so that was definitely experience. I didn't mess around with too many other characters for this first playthrough, just because it was enough work just figuring out what everything does, since I can't read Japanese. I did play as Tai Tree for a little bit, and I think that was pretty much it. I played as others when I was forced to. You had specific fights where you had to like fight as each character in like pairs. There was a part of the story where all 6 of your main characters were split into groups of 2. So there were times where I didn't have Tai Tree or Vague, so I had to kind of deal with that situation when it came up. And, you know, it was tough when you aren't used to using a character. But I just kind of was like, okay, these are all my arts. I just need to spam the enemy as much as possible. Luckily, the fights that you have to do while you're in those groups of 2 are not that difficult overall. So gameplay-wise, the combat is definitely probably one of my favorites in Tales games. I would definitely love to see it get localized someday, you know, do like an HD, like, not like a remaster, but do like, you know, just do an HD upgraded version, then re-release it on like the PS4, or even just do like from like Fantasia all the way to like Symphonia or something. Or no, go from Fantasia to like Abyss and just put all like a Kingdom Hearts collection type thing. Just like update the graphics, not the graphics, but like just make it look nice in 1080p. And put it on the newer consoles. That would definitely be nice. Plus, that would give an excuse for Rebirth and Destiny 2 to get localizations, which I would definitely love, because I would do many playthroughs on Tales of Rebirth if I didn't have to look at a translation guide. So that's for the gameplay. As for the overall scope of the world, it was very different, I would say. I mean, it wasn't like super different, because it kind of reminded me of Symphonia. Because timeline-wise, this game came out, I think it was a year after Symphonia. I think Symphonia came out in 2003, and then this game came out in I think Symphonia was 2002, and this game was 2003. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong on that. But yeah, so it reminded me of Symphonia in terms of like the overworld stuff, like when you're walking around. The one thing I will say I noticed a lot more, and it's obviously very different, in Symphonia, when you're in the outer world, and even when you're in dungeons and stuff, you actually have to walk into the enemies to get those encounters. In Rebirth, it is random encounters. So you can't really control, like, oh, I don't want to fight this specific enemy right now. You really don't have a choice. Even when you put on the holy bottles, it doesn't really help that much. I still found myself every 10 steps I was getting into another battle. So I guess my one gripe with Rebirth, or one, I don't think there's too many gripes, but I would definitely say one of them would be that I feel like the random encounters were too frequent. Like, if I wanted to farm, then, you know, it really wouldn't be hard to do so because how often the encounters were. But if I was, like, just trying to grab a treasure chest in a room before leaving, I would have to... If I'm taking, like, 20 steps, I get into, like, 3 encounters before I leave the room. And there are certain parts of the story where even the random enemies will just kick your butt. Like, honestly, they are really, really strong, even if you're at the correct level for it. It's just, some of them just really hit hard, or they have really weird, kind of annoying mechanics that just will, like, freeze you in place or do something to you. So there is that. I got frozen a lot. I will definitely say that. I think that was probably the biggest thing I dealt with, was getting frozen. There would be a lot of times where Vague was just stuck standing still and everyone else is just kind of running around. But as for, you know, the dungeon layouts, I love the dungeon layouts. I think they all look very nice. I loved how the sprites look for the characters. You know, obviously in newer Tales we're getting to the point where it's like they're really trying to go for like the high tier graphics and full models and everything, but honestly there's something about the older games, and I'm noticing as I'm playing Legendy as well right now, I like the smaller sprites. I think I like them more than the newer kind of like full body stuff. Like, I find it much more enjoyable seeing Rebirth characters talk in cutscenes, and by the way, the skits have so much expression to them. You don't really see that as much anymore, even though we have full-body skits and stuff like Zestiria and Berseria. The characters don't have as much expression as they did in Rebirth. Like, the characters moved around a lot more, I feel like, in these skits. Which is very interesting, because Rebirth was full-body skits, and then all the way up to, like, Zestiria, I think. There may have been some games I haven't played. Well, actually, no, because Legendia has full-body skits as well. But Legendia barely has any skits. They're really very infrequent. But, you know, Symphonia, you had the, like, boxes with just the heads. Same thing with, like, Vesperia, just had the boxes. And Zillia, I don't remember. I think Zillia 2 did as well. Where it was just, like, the heads in the boxes. So, it's very interesting how they kept switching back and forth. But I think now, you know, we'll have to see when Tales of Arise comes out. And obviously we have Tales of Cristoria coming out here in a little bit, which we have seen are full-body skits, just like Tales of Arise. But it seems like full-body skits are something they're going to stick to moving forward. Anyways, back to my point, I really loved how the skits looked in Rebirth and just everything. The only tough part I had with the skits was skits in this game, they just move. It's not like in Legendia or some other titles where you actually have to click the button to continue the skit, so I found myself like always rushing back over to my translation guide to make sure as they're talking I was staying, which did kind of give me some trouble, because most of the time when talking was happening, I wasn't even looking at the game, I was looking at a guide, so, you know, I had to keep like looking back and forth to make sure I wasn't missing any like fun expressions and stuff like that. So that was a lot of fun there. Let's talk about the story, and this will probably be the big part of the video. I really love the story in this game and just how the story is set up. The story is split into 3 arcs, and there will be, like I said, there's going to be brief spoilers, because I am going to talk about, because I have to talk about the story in order to explain what I liked about it. But like I said, I'm not going to go into like, oh, how the game ends and stuff like that. So let's first talk about what are the 3 story arcs. The first story arc is basically, so the game starts out, you know, you get your little prologue before you actually start playing, and it's essentially before, so there's this whole situation that happens where everyone, not everyone, but Force was not something that was always in the world, and it's something that people just started to manifest. So you get this scene where the Force literally just starts manifesting all over the world, and Vague and Claire are together, and Vague obviously being our main character, and the force that manifests within Vague goes out of control. He has the force power of ice, and he accidentally freezes Claire in this giant like pillar of ice inside like I forget what building it was. It wasn't Claire's house, because we know where she lives pretty early in the game, but it was like a little house in the back of town that she gets frozen in. And then for like, I think it was like the next year, I might be wrong on the time there, you know, Vague is just like every day just trying to like get her out, and he can't do it. And I think this will be the first Tales game I played where you get so many of the party members so fast. Because I feel, well, I don't want to say that, because in Symphonia, within the first, like, 20 minutes, you have a full party of 4 once you meet Kratos. So I guess that's not entirely true. But I feel like some other, you know, like in Zestiria, you start off with just Soraya and Mikleo for a good while. I guess Alicia is kind of like in and out of your party. Anyways, Mao and Eugene show up. Mao is a small red-haired boy, and Eugene is what's known as a Gajima, which I need to explain that kind of thing there. So this world is split up into 2 races of people. There are Humas and Gajimas, which is pretty simple. Huma is humans, and then Gajimas are essentially like beast people. So you'll see so many different kinds in this game. There will be like birds, there will be like bears, there will be what would Eugene's like a tiger of some kind, I would assume. I guess you would a tiger, or no, I guess he'd be more of a panther. Yeah, I'd say he's more of a panther. So you essentially, but they have humanistic traits, like they stand on 2 feet, you know, they talk like normal human beings. So it's not like they're actual like animals. They're just animal people. And basically what the overarching plot of this game, and a lot of other Tales games do this, where you get a lot of Tales games where there is a form of segregation. And I feel like this is just a JRPG trope just in general. But, so like in Symphonia, you had the essential, like, you know, the, what would you call it? I guess racism towards the half-elves. In Xillia, they, you know, the people from, you know, one world, I forget what they, you know, classified themselves as, but essentially you had, like, the world where Ludger's from and the world where Jude is from, they kind of see each other in a different light. And it was kind of the same thing in Symphonia, too. You know, you had the people in Tethe'alla and Silverant, you know, the people in Tethe'alla, because they had all the mana for so long, were these sophisticated, kind of technologically advanced people, while they saw the Silverant people as kind of like barbarians. It's kind of a similar thing here, but in those games, it's kind of like a side point. It's not the entire point of the entire story, whereas in Rebirth, that is the point of the entire story. Everywhere you go, you see more and more of this racism towards each other. You know, the Humas look at Gajimas like they're unintelligent, just beasts, and that they should just, you know, they're only good for muscle, where, you know, the Gajimas see themselves as, oh, you know, what do we need these humans for? We can just do everything ourselves. So everywhere you go, it becomes more and more apparent. At first, you don't see it as much. You see little parts here and there. But it's not until really the second arc of the game where you really see it come out into full force. But let's go back to the point of the story. So essentially, the whole first arc, I'm not going to go into every single detail of what you do when you go to each town, but essentially the first part of the arc is you get these people who come from the capital, who are part of a group that's known as the 4 Stars, which are essentially your mini-villains of the game. They're going around from town to town, kidnapping human women, and they basically, once Mao has the force of fire, he's able to free Claire from what Vague did, but then almost immediately after, you know, these 4-star people, they come and they take Claire. They're like, oh, she's a pretty girl, we're taking her. So, the big part of your first arc is just trying to get Claire back. So, as, you know, they're taking Claire to the capital, you're trying to find out, you know, which way they're going, how they're getting there. So, a lot of your journey is, you know, at least for the first part, is Vague, Mao, and Eugene trying to get to the capital, with Mao and Eugene kind of having their own motives, which Eugene essentially left the military of the capital because he didn't like the way things were going, because apparently the Queen has been changing how she acts and everything, and you find out later on that why the Queen is kidnapping these girls, but that's actually a big story point, so I won't be talking about that here. So, I'm going to talk about some of the supporting characters as well. So, you meet Annie, who is essentially a doctor in training, and her whole story point is she wants to kill Eugene because she is under the impression that, and, you know, so is the rest of the world, that Eugene is the one that killed her father, who was Dr. Bars. Her name is Annie Bars. Obvious thing there. And Eugene will, even to her face, he wouldn't admit or deny anything, you know. And whenever she would say something, he would just kind of like sigh and, you know, be like, okay, do what you want. You know, you can kill me when all this is over, but I have a mission to accomplish. So until then, I can't let you kill me, type thing. So a lot of the first and a decent amount of the second arc is Annie has this hatred towards Gajumas because the Gajuma killed her father, which is pretty standard for a character like her. You know, you see one person of a specific race do one thing, all of a sudden all those people are bad. So her big story kind of arc is her eventually trying to overcome that hatred towards a race of people, and it's actually a really good story. And then you have Hilda, who is... Oh, by the way, Annie, I've already explained that Annie's basically your only healer, but she's the magic type. She's the kind of like buffer, kind of like magic type. And then you meet Hilda, who is your final... Oh, no, I will talk about Tree after Hilda. Hilda was basically... She attacks you at first. She was working with the 4 stars, but... Or working for them, more likely. She was kind of just a throwaway pawn, as you find out pretty early on. But then she joins you, you know, at first it's just kind of like, okay, I've got nowhere to go, so I may as well, type thing. But you soon learn that she is what's known as, well, I wouldn't say soon, but not really too far. Actually, no, it's pretty soon after. You learn that she's a half. She was essentially conceived by a Huma and a Gajuma, so she is half of each. You know, on the surface, if you just look at her while she's, you know, wearing her normal outfit, you would just think that she's a Huma, but she actually, under her little cap that she wears, or beanie, I don't even know what you would call it, she has these 2 horns that she actually you can tell that she tried to actually, you know, cut them off before. So they're like half horns at this point. And her whole story arc is essentially coming to terms with who she is. She has to understand her, I guess, self-worth in just accepting that, okay, I'm fine with being who, you know, I am. I don't need to be someone else. But in the beginning, she's just kind of like, oh, I want to find a way to just make myself fully, essentially, like one race. She wants to be a full Huma, and she doesn't want to have these horns anymore and all that stuff. And then we go to Tree, who you meet later on, who's, I would say he's kind of the comic relief character of the group, but at the same time, I feel like he's the very kind of like, he's the blunt, lighthearted, like, good character. What I really liked about Tree is his Japanese voice is the same as Usopp, and Usopp is someone I really like. And you can kind of see similarities in their characters, but not to a deep extent. But the thing I like about he's a very kind of like Lloyd Irving type character, wherein he always wants to see the best in people. He doesn't discriminate depending on race. He just judges you for the person that you are, overall. So it doesn't matter, you know, what race you are. You could be, you know, a Huma, a Gajuma, you could be a bookcase. He's still going to treat you based on your actions, not what you look like. So I really like that about him as a character, because you see some trials that everyone goes through, and he's the one person that's like, hey, why the hell do we care? We're all people. And I really do like that about his character. So after that, you have your full party. This is one of those Tales games that, you know, after Symphonia, you'd be like, damn, you know, there's not that many characters. But if you really think about it, Symphonia 1... 2 characters play exactly the same. You just switch them out when one leaves your party for a time. And then 2 of the other characters don't even come in till like late game. So there is that. So 6 characters may seem kind of small to people, but I feel like it was a perfect amount. So yeah, the first arc is basically a lot of just kind of cat and mouse. You just keep going from town to town trying to figure out, you know, where Claire is being held. And then, of course, at the end of the first arc, you finally make it to the city, and you know, barge your way into the castle, you climb all the way up, you essentially fight what's known as a sacred beast. There's basically some ritual where the queen herself is trying to obtain a pure body, and she summons a sacred beast in order to, or I don't remember exactly if something goes wrong, but essentially her actions cause a sacred beast to be summoned, and you have to fight it, and once you beat it, there's this whole light that goes all over, you know, the kingdom, and that leads into the second arc. You save Claire, or so you think, you take her home, and that's what starts the second arc. And the second arc is, I don't know what I would exactly call it, but it's essentially, how would I word this? This is gonna be, I'm trying not to be like super spoilery, but essentially what happens is the queen gets her wish, but what happens is Claire and the queen essentially switch bodies. And a lot of the second arc, you just have Claire's body with you. I'm using air quotations, but it's really the queen inside her, and you can tell right away the way she's acting, but obviously the main characters aren't any the wiser. So you spend a good, like, 60% of the second arc, I feel like. Well, yeah, I would say 60% or more of the second arc. You know, you're going through these trials. Essentially, you're trying to find out why the world is changing, which is what I'm going to talk about. I was talking about the light that went all over the world. Essentially, increase the hatred of Gajumas and Humas towards each other. So you go to towns you've already visited before, you find them, you know, even angrier than before, saying that they don't need to be there. You know, what do we need these filthy Humas or Gajumas for? And you even see it with Yuji. It's affecting the Gajumas, but the result of the Gajumas now acting more hostile makes the Humas act more hostile. And you see it in Eugene. Eugene locks himself in a cell because all he wants to do is kill Humas. And that's obviously not how he really feels. So you have to figure out what's going on with that. You have to get him some temporary medicine, which doesn't last very long, but his willpower was so strong that he's able to repress these urges for a good part of the second arc until this is all dealt with. And the way they get rid of this kind of feeling within people is they have to go through these trials, which is pretty standard for a Tales game, for a character to go through a trial. You know, you have all your party members have, like, whatever's important to them, or whatever it is they are trying to achieve be like their main trial. So all 6 of your you go to different parts of the planet, and each character has a dungeon that you go through, and they have to overcome a trial. So, like, for example, Hilda's was accepting who she is, Annie's was overcoming the hatred towards Gajumas and learning the truth about what actually happened to her father, etc., etc. I don't want to go into too much spoilers with that, but essentially that is what those trials were for. And they basically had to obtain these powers so that they could fight Georgius again, who was the sacred beast they fought the first time, and basically reverse what had already been done. So that was the main part of the second arc, and the other kind of sub-part of the second arc, well, not the sub-part, I suppose it was the main part, was the fact that the queen always viewed, you know, she always viewed things from her high chair in her castle, you know, just looking down on the people in the world. So now that she was living in the body of this, you know, normal girl from a from a normal village, she got to see things in a different light and kind of be like, oh, okay, you know, I was a queen just watching stuff from my high horse while all these people down here are suffering and fighting amongst each other. You know, I should be doing more. And then Claire got to see what it was like being inside the queen's body, and Claire's great. Honestly, just point blank, you know, even, like, right off the bat, when she realizes she's in the queen's body, she's like, okay, you know, I just have to do whatever it is I can to make the world a better place. It wasn't like, oh no, how am I going to get my body back? Like, that wasn't even her first thought. Her first thought was, well, okay, how can I help these people in front of me? So Claire is a great character for that. And you get to see the queen's development there as well. And then the third, I don't want this to run on too much longer because we've been talking here for about half an hour now. The final arc is the shortest arc. It's really not that long. Like, I put a total of 60 hours, I think, into Rebirth before I finished it. And I think the third arc was only like the last 12 hours. Which I did have to do a bit of grinding for. So if I didn't have to do that grinding for my weapons and stuff, because the final weapons I wanted to buy were pretty expensive, it probably would have been even less than that. It's essentially, you know, everything is pretty much accepted, but then you get, you essentially get the remnants of the people who worked for the Queen, you know, the 4 stars and all them. Basically, this was all part of a plan all along, just to essentially get control over the world, wipe out all the humas, all that stuff. So basically this monster, as I'm just going to call it, this like abomination of darkness called Eurus gets summoned, and your job is to take it out. So you take out the 4 stars, you go up to fight Eurus, you fight Eurus, and you save the world. But at this point, this is where you really see the whole cast kind of come together, you know. Eugene and Annie are friends at this point. You know, you can definitely see that there is kind of like, there's now a father and daughter bond between them that she probably always wished that she had with her own father. Mao finds the realization for his existence. Same thing with Hilda. She was able to kind of come to terms with who she is. Vague came to realize that... Oh, and this is the best. I have to go back a little bit to talk about this. So 80% of the game, I would say, Vague is a very closed-off character. So I don't want to say he's comparable to Velvet, but you definitely see that kind of like, okay, I really just don't want to talk about my feelings. I don't want to say anything. We just got to get done what we need to get done. Vague is definitely one of those characters where he just doesn't know how to express his feelings. So for 80% of the game, you know, you really don't get to learn too much about him other than the fact that, okay, you know, he wants to help his friends around him and he wants to save Claire. But once Claire is no longer an objective to save, once she's safe, is really when you get this scene, and this is going to be a spoiler, but, you know, it's probably the best scene in the game. Basically you see Vague's power go out of control again, because when they got these Sacred Beast powers, they said if your heart ever wavered from the reason you got these powers, that it would essentially take control of you and go rampant. So you get this part where you actually have to fight Vague with the rest of your party because his force went rampant because he was starting to second-guess everything. So then Tai Tree is basically like, let me talk to you on the beach for a second, and he just socks Vague in the face, and they have this fight. And the main point of that fight was Tai Tree was like, we don't know anything about you. How could we know anything about you? Because you don't tell us anything. And because Vague was starting to say, like, how could you possibly know what I'm dealing with, what I'm going through? And Tai Tree's like, yeah, you're right. I don't know what you're going through because you won't tell us anything. So they hash it out, and that's when... It's unfortunate that it takes that long in the game. I wish that that scene had happened sometime in the second arc, because I would have loved to have gotten more time with more opened up Vague, because from that point forward, you really do see Vague start to talk to everybody more. You know, he starts to confide in people more. And then when you get to the final dungeon is where you really see... I mean, he's a very kind of stoic kind of character, even still, you know. He's a very, you know, I guess stoic, say he's a quiet character. He's not someone that's all of a sudden just going to be like, you know, just talking, you know, left and right about his feelings every now, but you do see him open up, you know, you do see him crack smiles towards the end, and you get to finally see, like, what's very important to him. He's not, like, at the same time, you also see it's like, okay, he finally accepts that, you know, okay, Claire should be able to do what she wants to do. She doesn't need me to babysit her all the time just to make sure that she's safe. So when he goes off to the final dungeon and she's there, you know, he's like, okay, I trust you. You're gonna be safe on your own. Plus you have, there was a character named Milhouse. I didn't really go into him too much because his major purpose was to knock Vague on his ass and make him realize that he can't just save everything through brute force. But yeah, so he knew that she was going to be safe, so he was able to go with his comrades to essentially save the world. And I just... Vague is a very interesting character because he's one of those characters where it's just like... He's very quiet, but at the same time, you can tell when he's really, really suffering. So it was really cool in that last dungeon. You get to see a lot of speeches from him. You know, he is a... despite how young he is... I mean, he's not like young, but... despite his age, he gets to give some pretty good speeches there at the end, so that was pretty cool there. And you know, they save the world, and everyone essentially goes back to normal life until Vague gets ripped from his world and put into Tales of the Rays. So that's pretty much everything plot-wise I think I want to talk about for the story. It was a very good story. I think the way they handled the issue with racism was dealt with really well, so I was very happy to see that. And it was tough to watch sometimes. You know, you see these characters being like extremely racist to each other. You're like, damn, just stop doing that. Just stop. And it did. You know, it made me angry, and I think that's what was the point of it was. So yeah. That's pretty much my overall review on Tales of Rebirth. You know, everything I liked and everything. I didn't really have too much I didn't like, other than, like I said, I didn't like the random encounters being so frequent, and then, you know, obviously having to use a guide. But like I said, if we ever get that game localized, I will 100% do a playthrough on the channel for it. I would definitely love to play through that game again. But if you guys enjoyed my review, let me know what you guys think. Would you like to play this game someday? And if you have played it, definitely let me know your thoughts on the game down below. Try not to be too spoilery. I know I spoiled quite a bit about the plot, but I feel like I kept most of the big things out of... Maybe. Who knows? I feel like there's probably only a few big things I could have really spoiled there. Just like, well, damn. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Let me know what you guys think down below. Don't forget to subscribe for more if you're new to the channel. I will have a review out for Legendia when I finish that, but I still have quite a bit left on that game. I think I'm probably only like halfway through the main story, and then I guess there's like a post-story that's like half the game. So when I'm done with that, I'll have a review out on that. And then moving forward, any other Tales games I haven't beaten, I will do reviews on as well. That's gonna be it, guys. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all next time.